Without awareness, we can love our romantic partners not for them, but for our shadows. This video is going to be a bit different from other ones because I have zero script. This was something that I knew I needed to record because of experiences that I've been having dating again after my last partnership. So if you've ever had a partner in college and are trying to date again, this video is extremely relevant. Because what I realized is I thought that I healed a lot of the shadows from my last partnership and the ones before that. But as I've gone through this dating experience for the last month and a half, I've realized a lot of the things that I thought I healed are coming up subconsciously in the partnership and actually making it harder to love the person for them. So I wanted to, in kind of a journal entry format, just go through some of the realizations that I've had alongside my commentary on how you can navigate your own shadows in relationship so that you can love your partner in college, not from your shadows, but from a deep appreciation of who they are authentically so that you can both grow. So, with that being said, I think the main shadow that I realized I had came through over the last few weeks, particularly. I started to give the person I was dating the ocean before they could give me the tide. Writing poems, making songs, planning out these elaborate dates, going to specific places, nice dinners, and doing things that were thoughtful for them, like writing a poem on chess, since we've been playing so much chess inside of our relationship. And as soon as I felt like that wasn't being reciprocated, the degree of care and consideration that I was putting inside of these dates, I jumped. I told them I needed some space after our last date to reflect on why I felt so much emotional pain. And unfortunately, this was after the date was over instead of being able to talk about it in the moment, which was strange for me because usually I could sense this sort of shadow coming up as it comes up. But this one caught me totally off guard. I only felt it after the date happened. And so I was sitting in bed thinking about why was this causing me so much emotional pain, doing all this considerate date making and then wanting to jump. And what I realized was quite scary, which is I have a shadow from my last relationship where I learned that I needed to build intimacy as fast as possible so that betrayal couldn't happen. And the reason I felt that way is in my last relationship, I was friends with them for 3 years before we got into a relationship. And for 4 months before the relationship, I had confessed my feelings, told them that I loved them, and they felt the same way. But they didn't feel ready to get into a relationship because they were polyamorous and already had 2 partners. I'd never been polyamorous before, so me being me, I had no idea what I was doing. And I decided I loved them enough to give it a shot, to just wait for those 4 months. My strategy during those 4 months was to just try and get as close as possible with considerate dates and whatnot, so that the chance that a relationship might happen could happen. Now, looking back, of course, I know this was misguided to some degree, and partly because I still felt a hole in myself of not being with a spiritual partnership, which pulled me to get into this relationship in the first place. What happened is I got into the relationship after those 4 months, and yet even with all that intimacy building, it still ended up not working out. And so what I learned there was actually the wrong lesson, but it still got carried into my partnerships, which is, okay, if I build super good amounts of intimacy, then I might be able to get into the relationship, which is what happened with my last partner. But the betrayal will still happen regardless. And so that's where the anxious avoidant tendency comes in, is I pull, and then as soon as I feel it's not being reciprocated, I jump. Now, to be fair to myself, I think overall I still have secure attachment. I just love psychoanalyzing. I love reflecting. And so these aren't super extreme, but they are tendencies that I've noticed in myself. And so the way I like to think of it is this is kind of like Orpheus in the Greek myth. If you don't know, Orpheus falls in love with this woman in the underworld named Eurydice. And the gods like him so much, they tell him, you can bring her out of the underworld as long as you walk out without looking back to make sure that she's still following you. And then she can be with you. So Orpheus goes into the underworld. He walks out all the way up until the last step out of the underworld. And then it's unbearable for him. He can't wait any longer. He looks behind and she's gone. And this resonates a lot with my own relationship shadows, because I feel the exact same fear of betrayal, of abandonment, because of my last partnership and the one before that. I feel like I'm always giving more than I'm getting. I'm always loving the other person more than they love me. So this points to more of a general principle of shadow in relationships, which is the relationships that we've gone through give a profound template for our future relationships. And if we're not conscious of how those past relationships are affecting us now, we will love the person through our shadows, not for them. So you have to reflect on what happened in your last relationship. What might you have learned that is affecting your current one? Are you projecting those things onto the current person that you're dating in college? These shadows you can learn more about in my shadow journaling video up above. But as a general principle, our shadow tends to come through attachment or avoidance, or addiction or avoidance. So in addiction, we're so close to a part of us that we can't appreciate how it's affecting us. For example, I was so close to the part of me that is addicted to building intimacy that I couldn't see how I was giving too much too soon. They can also be avoidant shadow, where we're so distant from a part of us that we don't appreciate how it's affecting us. Like my avoidance of staying with someone as soon as I see that gap is too large of care. So the speed of intimacy is a big shadow that I noticed. Another shadow that I noticed is I have a fear of being intimate but with no label, like being in a relationship. That reads as danger to me. And the reason is there were 4 months where I loved my last partner where we weren't in a relationship, quote unquote. During those 4 months, it felt like we were. In many ways, we would spend time at least 3 or 4 days a week, which is a lot. We'd watch movies, we'd have awesome excursions and adventures, but we didn't have that label. And my fear ended up getting confirmed because my fear in not having the label is they didn't care about me as much as I hoped they did. And they didn't. They loved one of their other partners more without being very clear about that to me either. And so not having a label now reads as danger. In the current person I'm dating, they got out of a relationship 2 months before. And so they aren't ready for a partnership. That reads very difficult for me because I don't want to push them into something they're not ready for. But at the same time, I feel a lot of danger of being in that situation. And so after more reflection, I realized that it's not the label that I seek. It's the transparency and trust that the label implies. And the label doesn't have to be there in order for that to exist. It's a good indicator because having the label does imply some amount of external trust, but it's not absolutely fundamental. And so I'm trying to learn in this current dating phase, what does it look like to lean more into the trust and the transparency rather than needing the label to be there when they're not ready for it? While still honoring, is it right for me to enter into this dating phase without having that label? Am I just playing into my shadow again? Into this pattern that I've had in the last 2 relationships that I've been in? I don't know. Sometimes there's not a clear answer either. This is added onto another aspect, another color of the shadow, which is there's a great imbalance that I feel in how much I sacrifice for someone else that I love and how much they do for me, which goes back to the whole speed is armor thing, the build intimacy quickly. With my last partnership, I took 2 flights to Texas in order to see them. And I stayed in Ithaca a whole extra year after I graduated from Cornell, got a remote job at Octalysis just so I could be with them in their last year. The biggest thing that they did for me in terms of sacrifice was a 2-day drive to Hamilton, or a 2-day stay in Hamilton after an hour and a half drive, which is where my parents live. And then 2 weeks after they came back to Cornell for their last year, they broke up with me, leaving me with a 9-month lease in a city that I no longer wanted to be in. Yeah. What did I learn from that? I learned that sacrifice imbalance is a terrible sign, which isn't necessarily true. Of course, a relationship doesn't have to be 50-50. That expectation can constrain it in this rigid way. But I've learned that if there is that imbalance, it means bad. And so in this current dating phase, the woman I'm dating asked if I wanted to go with her to the Velua, which is this nature reserve in around the Enschede area. It's really nice for just 3 days or so. And I would have found that sweet. I did find it sweet to some degree, but I realized I was actually getting triggered to my shadows from before because this reminded me of all the sacrifice imbalance from before. The interesting thing is it wasn't at all the same thing because with the sacrifices of before, it was one way. I was doing something that they weren't giving back. Here, it's a combined sacrifice. You're both going to a vacation spot for 3 days. It's only a 2-hour bus drive. You're splitting the costs. So it's not the same. And yet I still project my shadow onto it, which is another interesting principle of shadow is your displacement of your shadow from the past into the now doesn't have to be one-to-one. You can put it onto something that isn't really the same. You're just projecting onto it, which is why it's so important to reflect on how your internal landscape is affecting or coloring your external world. So those are some big ones. Speed is armor, intimate but with no label, the sacrifice imbalance. I also realized I have a fear of having to, I have a devaluing of having to ask for my needs to be met. It feels like it doesn't count if I have to ask for my date or my partner to do something to make me happy rather than them just perceiving it. And of course, I know that this is unreasonable, because how are they supposed to read my mind and just know exactly what I'm thinking? But again, as you probably heard 1,000 times in this video now, it stems back to my last partnership, where I would ask for all these needs that I knew I needed. Some of them I definitely reflected on were unreasonable to ask, but some of them I knew I needed, like being present when you're with me, at least some of the time, instead of hanging out all the time, asking questions and listening to the answers. When I brought these up, they would always say, yes, I totally understand. Thank you for telling me, and I'm going to do better. It got better for a week sometimes 2, but it always went back almost to zero afterward. And this was deeply painful because it felt like I had no control over things getting better. I was always the one bringing stuff up, and nothing ever changed for the long term. So what I learned tacitly is having to ask doesn't do anything. And only the things that I didn't have to ask from the first place, she just did right away, mattered. So this came into my current person I'm dating, where I felt hesitant to ask for things at first. And now I'm realizing that's a past projection that I'm healing through, but it's really painful, of course. I think the last thing, which has been very interesting, is reflecting on the fractal nature of this healing process in shadow. I'll be honest, I thought I'd healed this almost entirely in the months after my breakup with my last partner. I did hundreds of hours of meditation, of journaling, of conversation, of forgiveness, and I thought it was mostly gone. But if there's one thing I've learned about the whole process of reflection and growth, it's that it never truly ends. It just expands and grows outward as you transcend and integrate your shadows over and over and over again. It's like a fractal, just expanding infinitely. And I noticed that with this current person I'm dating, is as soon as I was in the dating context again and in a position where I was front and center caring for someone, a lot of shadows I couldn't even see from beforehand came up again. So if you're single right now and you think you've healed from your last partnership, let this be a warning that it very likely will have things come up again. And that's the beautiful thing about partnership, is that if you find someone who's willing to grow with you in transcending and integrating your shadows together, then you can navigate this without turmoil, or with less. And I think that's the thing I want to end this video on, is part of what's helping me heal this so much better now is the person I'm dating is very open to discussing these things and very understanding about where I'm coming from, because their last partner, they also have shadows from. And so I strongly recommend, if you're going to find someone in college, especially if you have shadows that you know you're holding on to from your last partnership, find someone who's willing to grow with you through the shadows, not as their sole responsibility, that's yours, but as the person who will trigger those shadows and then help you navigate them over time. Because if you're doing this alone and you can't communicate this work with them, that makes it twice as hard. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this more free flow video without a script. Tell me how you feel about it in the comments. I hope this helped with your own relationship journey. And if you found this resonant, I strongly recommend you check out my Cosmic Journaling Kit. It's free. It's a gamified journaling system. It helps you reflect on your shadows, grow your emotional intelligence and your purpose through 1,000+ journaling questions and templates. So you can find that in the description below. As always, I hope you have a phantasmal, splentastic rest of your day. Eat some peanut butter, and goodbye.